My Govanin Melanin, and welcome to Medieval Art. I'm Dr. Brian Keane, and our Fellowship of Curators has the great honor to welcome the Rings of Power dialect coach, Leith McPherson. Leith, we are so thrilled that you're here, so thank you for spending this moment with us.
Oh, Michael Vanden, it is an absolute joy to be in your company. Absolute joy.
Leith, I can already tell there's so much great synergy from our pre-conversation. We all love Tolkien, and especially the appendices, as I know you do. So I was wondering if you could start us off by how it was working with the actors, the showrunners, and the writers when you were thinking about bringing the languages of Middle-earth's races to life.
Gosh, it's been the whole project, and we're now into season 2, as you know. The whole project has been one of meeting fellow passionate nerds, really, which is where I love to be at all times. And so to get to work with people who have such creativity and imaginations that are as big as the canvas they're attempting to populate a small part of is such an extraordinary process to contribute to. So what the showrunners with Rings of Power decided to do was to build an acoustic landscape that helped you to move, as we need to do in a story like this, across 8 episodes. You need to be able to go, where am I? What am I looking at? Who am I? With whom am I spending time? So that the choice made by the creative team was then to populate the different cultures with acoustic sign markers, so giving them different accents. And hello, that's where I kind of step in and say, all right, this is the sort of palette that you can choose different colors from. And I then let them say, okay, this is the kind of acoustic quality we want for this culture, which would be different from that culture. And you start to populate a map which is inspired by accents of the United Kingdom and Ireland, but not intending to be the United Kingdom and Ireland or any other country that we know. It's supposed to have an otherness to it. It is supposed to take you somewhere else. So that process was amazing to be part of. And then you then take those decisions to a cast, a lot of whom had already been cast by that point. So the accents hadn't been decided before a lot of the casting of key members of our company, as it were, of our fellowship, started to arrive in New Zealand. So that process then of saying, all right, we're going to be Scots, dwarves, let's go. And having actors need to not only just find consistency across the sound map we were building, which was intended to indicate perhaps Scottish, but not necessarily be a specific location in Scotland. So trying to find consistency across that sound map, while at the same time finding individual character and ownership and authenticity within a created character in a fantastical world. In an age that none of us have experience of before. So that has a degree of creativity in it as well, because you're trying to unlock the individual mind of the actor to then say, how does this sit with you? How does it carry as you embody this actor? How do you take it forward into this act of storytelling? So that you take that from pre-production into filming and then into post-production as well.
I'd actually
Gosh, that was a long answer. It's a complicated process.
Totally. I'd actually love to follow up on something you were just sort of alluding to. So dialects from the United Kingdom and Ireland and Scotland have been a frequent part of medievalizing fantasy, really from its inception. And Rings of Power, of course, fits into this world. And so I'm sort of wondering how you think about the expectation that certain races will have certain aspects. For example, dwarves will always have Scottish accents, that kind of thing. And how do you kind of add something new, or how do you re-envision those accents to be part of a different kind of story when it has been such a hallmark of medievalizing fantasy for such a long time?
It's such an interesting question to me, and it really is something. It's something that I have referred to when I've been working with actors who are in projects that I call sort of sword and sandal stuff, where you think it is so associated with a kind of Britishness in it, you know, and what that is about is something for us all to unpack in various PhDs somewhere. But but that sense of the signals that you're giving an audience, sometimes they are intentional and received in the way that they're intended. Sometimes they are intentional and received differently, and sometimes you just have a sense of you're heading in a different direction and hoping that people will shift along with you. So that sometimes it's a shorthand and sometimes it's intended to take you to a new place. And it's interesting with the dwarves, this has come up before where people have said, oh, the dwarves have always been Scottish, and you think, well, Tolkien didn't write them that way. You can't see that on the page. We had a dwarf in Peter's original movies of Lord of the Rings. We had one dwarf really in that, who had an accent that had some Scottish influence to it. And in The Hobbit, we had lots of dwarves, and they had lots of different accents. There was a group of them that were Scottish, but they were also from other places on the British map. So there is some association with it, and there's also the freedom for this to be a different feeling, or for us to, it's such it's the same world but a different project thousands of years before anything we've seen before. So there's a freedom with that. Obviously there's a responsibility with that, or a what is a weight with that. It's more than responsibility, because that feels like there is a right and a wrong. It's an opportunity and a weight that we carry to say, okay, this is our offering. This is the story that we're telling. This is the song that we're singing, going a bit more Tolkienian, you know, it's we're weaving these notes, these keys, these motifs into this song. And this is our offering to you. This is our humble offering, knowing that it is not a definitive interpretation, but a story that we're telling in the way that we've been given the opportunity to do. So that's on our minds all the time. And I just love being a part of that.
I think if it's okay if I jump in here, that just dovetails really nicely with a lot of conversations that we've had in the past about similar kind of issues around the visual culture of Middle-earth, and how there are so many references to things that we associate with certain periods and certain times. And it's always fun for us to kind of unpack how we see that happening, what new directions are being taken. And I was struck at the beginning when you used a visual metaphor when you're talking about the use of languages. You refer to it as a color palette, and, you know, kind of bringing in different colors. So that kind of leads into a question that I had, which had to do with what kind of relationship you might have had, or examples of your working with the visual side of the production, or even visual references that helped you establish or continue to help you establish the feel, you know, the kind of sense of a certain culture or a certain language that you try to get off, or do you, or try to create with actors in the production team. Are there specific examples? Are there sources that you go to, or does the visual not come to play in as much for you in your work?
I talk about this all the time with people, which is kind of my opportunity not to notice things and maintain a sense of wonder. I'm not the visual one in the family, for sure. It's really something that I work my work, and I'm so focused on my ears and the acoustic experience of the world that I get this extraordinary opportunity to be the wide-eyed child who gets to walk through this extraordinary creation, working with these incredible artists that I've had no contribution to at all in terms of visual, and to just, I don't know if it's fan, it's that feeling of being there, which is extraordinary. And so I don't think I've had any contribution to the visual at all in terms of the storytelling. I think it is a constant utter delight for me, because you're working with people who are so, the level of detail that you see, and this is one of the things about being crew on a show like this, that you will open a door into a small room in Numenor that you don't think the camera will probably ever go into, and in there is a tiny fresco on the wall that someone in the art department thought of. And there's a reference, a Tolkienian reference in that someone's looked up and given to this person, or they've looked it up themselves and thought, I think this would be, here's my offering. This is my thread of this tapestry. And that for me is a pleasure to be around. But no, I'm really, you feel outnumbered. You definitely feel outnumbered to be one of the people who's just focusing on the acoustic, because so many of the crew are really focusing on building the visual world. But I'm all about the ears.
Do
you work with the calligraphers at all?
I was going to say, I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit, because the sort of role that the vocal plays in the sort of appearance of the show, I think is so important though too, because if you walked into Numenor and they were speaking with a Midwestern accent, you would be like, what is going on here? Like, there's a way that the vocal makes the visual more consistent. So to Sarah's question about,
thank you.
I mean, you can ask your question about calligraphy.
That's very, thank you for saying that. That's thank you. That's very kind, and I'm very grateful. Thank you. The calligraphers. So I did. This is the one. This was a real moment for me. Daniel Reeve, who is an extraordinary, I'm seeing nodding heads. Good, we know who Daniel is. Extraordinary calligrapher, cartographer, artist in New Zealand. We got to meet. We've worked on Middle Earth projects before, but we got to meet when I was in New Zealand for season 1, and he showed me the Numenorian alphabet before it ended up on screen anywhere, and which was deeply thrilling. He had a wonderful workshop where some of Rob Arameo, for example, would go and do his calligraphy lessons there, and this extraordinary workshop. And I couldn't stop internally. I'm not sure if I was externally squealing, but certainly inside, I just kept exploding with joy at looking at these extraordinary things that would come out of his craft and his imagination. So he showed me this alphabet, which I think is beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. We've seen bits of it on the show already. And it had a phonetic basis for it. It sort of covered everything that you would need to in terms of the writing, but it had a phonetic quality to it as well. And so my one contribution was just saying, well, there is this strong elvish influence, for obvious historical reasons, on Numenor. And so if you are creating a phonetic alphabet, you need to have a trilled R there. You need to have a R sound. Otherwise it's incomplete. And he hadn't thought of that before, which was extraordinary, that I had some offering to make. And so he created a whole other letter that was based on that discussion that we had, where we just nerded out, him from the visual side and me from the acoustic side. And that was a special day. I loved it. So his work is brilliant, and we've all seen it. We all know it, and some of us carry it on our bodies. But he's an extraordinary artist, and that was a real pleasure.
Well, I almost squealed literally when you mentioned the trilled R, because I was going to mention that the R's for me actually were one of the touch points in several episodes. I think we all had this moment of coming together after Galadriel first arrived at Numenor. And when she has this line that, Morfydd's speech, when she declares that she is Galadriel of the Noldor, daughter of the Golden House of Finarfin, commander of the northern armies of High King Gil-galad. I just felt that there had to be a musical quality to the way that you worked with her, because the way she delivered it was so lyrical. But then you heard moments later when Muriel spoke, she refers to the Runish lands, the land of Rune. And I just loved the R's throughout this series. It was something that just came out to me musically and just in general throughout the season. And how people pronounce Celebrimbor. Wonderful, wonderful work.
Oh, I'm so grateful that you say that. It's really, I know that and this happens to all of us, books that you've read perhaps in your youth, but when we have this extraordinary private relationship with a text, which we all do when we pick up a book, we develop this extraordinary private relationship with the story. And I know that and not everybody gets to Appendix E. So not everyone knows the pronunciations that Tolkien would have intended. And so I know that when you then hear these names in this story out loud, sometimes you're pushing against what people will have heard in their heads. It happens all the time. And I am aware of the discomfort that it can cause. So when people say, yes, I heard it like that, and yes, I recognize that, it's deeply gratifying, and it makes me, it picks me up again to go onward. Let's try to serve the professor's work as best we can. Yeah, thank you. That's so lovely.
I wanted to toss it over to Diva for your question or for further dialogue.
Sure. Yeah, I just had one. Hello. I had one quick, this is all fantastic. I just had one quick question about kind of how you might, as you're kind of designing these soundscapes, or kind of, you call it the palettes of different sounds and accents, how you might nuance them from character to character, like within the dwarves, for instance, like how would you manage like Durin being different than Disa, for instance, and their accents, or, or how is it a negotiation between you and the performer, or how does that work?
Yeah, thank you. That's such a great question. Thank you. I think it's interesting because it is born of collaboration with the actor. It really, you can have people within a family who are from the same town, have lived in the same town, but they have different versions of that town's accent, even within a family group. Or the way that you express yourself can change in different circumstances. You can be more formal or less formal, or have that sense of incorporating the colloquial, or bonding with people in different ways. And so allowing for that kind of variation, I think, again, you want to work within every accent is kind of a zone of accuracy, and you let the actors work within that zone without that sense that they can't find individuality. Everyone has an idiolect, and so it's good to allow for that, I think, because it lets them feel like they have true individual ownership, and it doesn't just become cookie cutter, over policed rigidity. So yes, you have things like Durin, for example, is a prince. His background, but he's a generation separated from his father. His interests, his individuality come through in his voice. And then you do allow these actors who are going to play these characters for years, you allow them into that process as well. So that sense of what Owain brings to that character, and his own Welsh background, what it means when he then engages with another Celtic accent, informs the way that he speaks and the way that he uses language. So it's the meeting, it's the meeting of a lot of, it's alchemy, I mean, there's a theme in the story, but it's alchemy, so so we're trying to create these treasures together.
And that's a wonderful medieval reference as well to alchemy. Yeah, go on, Larissa.
I was just going to say, I wanted to throw in one question from a member of our fellowship who couldn't be here today, John McQuillan from the Morgan Library. He had a great question, which I'll try to re-articulate, which is Tolkien's work is obviously written, and so sort of fundamentally non-vocal in a way. And he was sort of wondering, or as you said,
how very dare you?
people bring their own vocality to it, we'll say.
Yes, very true.
Where do you see, I think, the space between Tolkien's work and your work, and how do you kind of think about Tolkien as an influence on you, if at all?
Oh gosh. Do you mean in terms of the work on the show, or do you mean more generally?
Yeah, I think it's sort of the idea of bringing Middle-earth to life vocally, kind of working within another person's creations in a way, but then bringing your own creation to it in a lot of ways as well. So where does Tolkien end and where do you start?
Oh, that gosh, that's the kind of question that spawns a million chat rooms and a lot of feedback. I wouldn't begin to try to place myself in that way. I think Professor Tolkien himself talked about the fact that these were stories that he's leaving room for other people to tell and other people to add to. And there was never a sense from him that these things were, even Elvish itself, Sindarin was never fixed or finished, or Quenya was never fixed and finished and complete. These are incomplete songs and stories. And so his influence on me is profound. I attempt to do him justice while at the same time taking his invitation. When we are filling a map in an age that is sketched at best, you are going to have to make choices. It's like decorating a home. You suddenly go, there are so many choices to make. The doorknobs and the lintels and and the chimney breast so within all of that, you are trying to honor and respect and step forward into a creative process, so that you know that you are painting outside the lines that were provided, and you hope that you recognize that you're doing that in a way that that is individual to you, or is born of this opportunity in this time with this creative team to attempt to tell a story inspired by this world, and respectful of this world and his work. It's such a fraught, it's so difficult when you're working with something that people revere so much, and you are one of those people, because you know that you have to step beyond canon, you have to step beyond instruction. As soon as language starts to come in that Tolkien didn't create, so as soon as our translation team starts to send you Dwarvish that is constructed, it's created, we are beyond Tolkien at that point. We are, but we have hopefully continued to step in the path that he was sending us in. So many metaphors in there, so many metaphors.
No, that was great. Thank you. It's such an interesting process, I think, because this is something that we all have talked a lot about, the way that medieval fantasy always exists in the time in which it's created in a really particular way, while also paying homage to a variety of different historical periods and coming from so many different influences. So it's interesting to hear how you approach that kind of divide, but the connection as well.
It's so interesting. And one of the things that we are very conscious of with Rings of Power is that we are working for an international audience as well. We're working for people for whom English is not their first language, or second, or maybe third, and so they're not even hearing it in English, a lot of our viewers. And so you want the sense that in that moment it's like with any kind of medieval text that's been translated, we're reading, there has been a creative insertion into the process that was not the author's. There is that act of translation, that act of, passing something hand to hand with all the intentions, the best intentions that you have, that things are changed through that process. And so that develops a patina on the object, right? That, it's a really, it becomes something other while not hopefully losing value, if that makes sense.
I think that's such a great thing to draw attention to, particularly on the heels of talking about, the respect for the professor and his work and everything, because that was a characteristic of literature, of art, of translation, of stories going through time, of which he was familiar to an extent that few other people were and are. So, an attentiveness to that, a recognition that things change when they go through a different medium, or when they're translated for a different audience, depending on who the audience is. Maybe it's a different language, audience, whatever. So, I just want to say I really appreciate that perspective. And I think it's very much in keeping with his thinking and his understanding of texts in the world.
And thank you. I think it's, and again, it's interesting for me looking at his languages, because he was constantly revising. So there was no chisel and stone. It really was, like all language, it was an evolving thing. The fact that it happened within this extraordinary man's imagination and craft is mind-boggling. And also ever changing. And so if he had, knowing everything that he knows about this world, gone back and rewritten Lord of the Rings, would these stories be told the same way? And this is the other thing, and now I'm getting really nerdy, but I hope that's okay. It's that idea that the stories that we read in Lord of the Rings are a story that was told to the person who put them into the red book, and that we're reading. It's like Ozymandias. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, and then it's like these layers of, well, who's telling the story? Who did this happen to? And then and then there's and the sands of the desert, but I haven't seen it. I just met the traveler from the antique land who told me about this thing. So that collective act, that kind of oral tradition as well, or linguistic tradition, all happened within this one man in his own lifetime. So how extraordinary.
I love, one of my favorite examples of that is in the appendix, or one of the appendices, when they're talking about, he's talking about the Cirth and the Tangwar on the title page, and how it's like, oh, it was a Gondorian scribe who was like working from the Thames book, which is a copy of the original Red Book, and that scribe wasn't as familiar with these languages, so there are built-in mistakes to like confirm, like, who thinks of this?
Yeah, it is extraordinary.
Yeah.
Medievalists think of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have so many, but it's those are the kinds of things that you tell yourself to make sense of the remains of history too, right? Like we have these objects, manuscripts and other pieces of art which tell us a particular story, but then there's so much left unsaid or unseen that you then have to kind of fill in the blanks a little bit and make up some hypotheticals, take some imaginative leaps. And so like, that's what we do as historians in a lot of ways. And I love that idea of him thinking so much like a historian that he has to actually explain it. And everyone was like, you don't actually need to explain this. Like no one wondered that, but he feels the need to kind of fill in those gaps.
I love that. Yeah, I think he was realistic in terms of in creating his own mythology. He created also the process of observing that mythology at a distance, which is amazing to me.
Well, Leith, I know we've taken so much of your time, and we're incredibly grateful for everything you've shared. I promised my two little children that I would share with them one little anecdote that you've spoken so much about the languages, but we've been debating the sung portions of Middle Earth. And I'll just say that we had a little debate over the Christmas holiday as we were reading some of the passages, that my son feels that the walking song, for example, should be sung to Good King Wenceslas, but my daughter feels that it should be Greensleeves, or What Child Is This? And so we had this really fun back and forth of, the road goes ever on and on, but sing it as Good King Wenceslas or the Greensleeves. It was very fun. But I think that's to your point about, we bring these textures and these colors to the world of Middle Earth, and that is adding to the palette and the richness. And so we've been so uplifted. I know I certainly have, from everything you've shared. Can you tell us in passing, or in culmination, is there one word or phrase that you think all of our listeners have to get right in terms of pronunciation, whether Elvish or otherwise, or a word that drives you nuts when you hear it mispronounced in Middle Earth?
Smaug is a trigger. Smaug's from my previous time in Middle Earth. Smaug is definitely a trigger. I think it's he's quite important. I think Sauron. Is certainly one that comes up quite a bit. I never feel judgmental of people who pronounce words from books in different ways. It's the fact that people are learning it from books. It just places me in a position of huge respect. So there's that. But then my job then is a separate thing to that moment of seeing people's engagement with a written text. That is their own experience, and not for me to judge it. Then pronunciation in terms of the Elvish is a different thing, and on we go. So in looking at the basis of Elvish, Sauron would be the pronunciation of that, that guy who's got some issues and some jewelry to make. There's some stuff going on with him. So it's quite good to get his name right, because he doesn't appreciate it when you don't.
That feels very appropriate. Thank you for that. Well, and I think we should then bid a nice farewell, or namarie, until next time.
No, no, please come back. This has been such a delight. Thank you so much for your time, and all respect to all of you. I think there is a alternate universe in which I would have done what you are doing in the places that you're doing it. And so a lot of love and respect to you all. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.